The billionaire wasn't supposed to hear it. Not like that. Not standing in front of a peeling white door in a part of the city his company had quietly ignored for years. He had followed his maid, just once, just to satisfy a suspicion he couldn't explain. But the moment the door cracked open, everything shifted. A child's voice, soft, certain. "Mom, did the hospital call about Grandma?" And then another voice, weak, fading. Calling a name that wasn't hers. The billionaire froze. Because in that one moment, the woman he thought he understood became a stranger, and the life he had built suddenly felt dangerously incomplete. Hello everyone, and welcome to today's story. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more emotional, dramatic, and surprising stories ahead. Be sure to leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. 3 weeks earlier, everything still looked perfectly in place. Victor Hale lived the kind of life people pointed to when they talked about success. A billionaire. A real estate CEO whose company had reshaped entire skylines, glass towers, luxury developments. Entire neighborhoods redesigned with his name quietly attached to them. His mansion sat on the highest ridge in the city, overlooking everything he had helped build. Clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows. Silence that felt expensive. Every morning followed the same rhythm. Coffee placed exactly where it should be. Papers aligned, meetings scheduled down to the minute. No surprises, no delays, no noise. Victor preferred it that way. Control wasn't just a habit. It was the reason he had everything. And in that perfectly controlled world, there were people who existed, but didn't quite register. Marisol Vega was one of them. She had worked in his mansion for almost 6 years. She was efficient, quiet, reliable in a way that made her almost invisible. The kind of person who moved through a room without disturbing anything. Not the air, not the mood, not the routine. Victor couldn't remember the last time he had asked her a personal question. Or if he ever had. She wore the same simple uniform every day, kept her dark hair tied back, spoke only when necessary, always polite, always composed. The house ran smoothly because of her. That much he knew. Everything else he had never bothered to find out, at least not until recently. It started small. A glance that lingered a second too long. A pattern that didn't quite fit. Victor had a habit of noticing patterns. It was how he built his empire. Numbers, behavior, timing. If something didn't align, he felt it before he could explain it. And lately, Marisol didn't align. Every evening, the moment her shift ended, she left. Not casually, not slowly. Quickly. There was always something in the way she moved, a quiet urgency. Not panic, not fear, but something close. Like someone who couldn't afford to be late. At first, Victor ignored it. It wasn't his business. She did her job well, that was enough. But then he started noticing more. She never stayed even a minute longer than necessary. She never accepted a ride. Even when it rained. Even when his driver offered more than once, holding the car door open with that patient, practiced politeness. She always shook her head. Small smile. Same answer. No thank you. And then she would walk. Fast, head slightly down. One hand gripping her worn brown bag like it mattered more than anything else she carried. Victor watched it happen again and again. Rain. Wind, cold. Same pattern, same urgency. One morning he looked up from his coffee and saw her across the dining room, polishing a cabinet near the window. The sunlight caught the edge of the wood. Her movements were steady, precise, almost mechanical, except they weren't. There was something careful in the way she worked. Not just skill, intention. Like everything she did had a reason behind it. Victor studied her for a moment longer than usual. "What are you going home to?" The questions came and stayed. He didn't like that. Questions without answers irritated him. They meant something was outside his control. He pushed the thought away and went back to his documents. But the question didn't leave. It followed him through the day, through meetings, through conversations, through numbers that usually held his full attention. And then one evening, something changed. He was standing near the hallway when Marisol came to say goodnight. Same routine, same quiet tone. "Good evening, sir." She reached for her bag, and for just a second she hesitated. It was subtle, barely noticeable. But Victor saw it. Her hand pressed the bag closed a little too quickly. Like she had realized too late that someone might be watching. Then she looked up, met his eyes, smiled. The same polite smile she always wore. Nothing unusual, nothing wrong. Except Victor knew what nothing wrong looked like, and that wasn't it. The door closed behind her. The house fell back into silence. Victor stood there longer than he should have. The sound of the refrigerator humming in the distance. The soft echo of footsteps gone. What's in that bag? The thought came without permission. He didn't like that either. He walked to the window and looked out over the city. Lights stretching in every direction. Buildings he had funded. Roads he had approved. Structures he had controlled from start to finish. Everything out there made sense to him. Everything followed rules. People he believed did too. They just hid their rules better. And Marisol was hiding something. The next morning it happened again. But this time it wasn't subtle. Victor was in the dining room reviewing contracts when a phone rang. Not his. Not the house line. Marisol froze. It was almost imperceptible, but he saw it. She stepped away quickly. Turned her back slightly as she answered. Her voice dropped, soft. Urgent. Yes, I understand. A pause. No, I'll figure something out. Another pause. Longer. Victor watched her shoulders tighten. Please, just give me until tomorrow. Silence. Then she ended the call. For a moment she didn't move, just stood there, still. Then she turned back. And just like that the expression was gone. The calm returned, the control. She went back to work like nothing had happened. Like there wasn't a storm just beneath the surface. Victor didn't say anything, but something inside him shifted. Not concern, not yet. Something colder, suspicion. He had built too much, lost too much, trusted too little to ignore that feeling. People didn't hide things for no reason. And in his world, hidden things usually meant problems. Legal, financial, personal, problems that spread, problems that cost. He watched her for the rest of the morning. Every movement, every detail. And for the first time in 6 years, Marisol Vega was no longer invisible. She was a question. And Victor Hale had never been the kind of man who left questions unanswered. That evening, as she walked out again, fast, focused, disappearing down the long driveway without looking back, Victor made a decision, a simple one, quiet. Almost casual. But it didn't feel casual. It felt like something had just been set in motion. Tomorrow he would find out where she went. And for the first time in years, he was willing to step outside his own perfectly controlled world to do it. Victor didn't mention it to anyone the next morning. Not to his assistant. Not to his driver. Not even to himself, at least not out loud. But the decision had already settled somewhere deeper, somewhere quieter. The kind of decision that didn't need to be repeated to feel real. He watched the clock, more than usual that day. Meetings came and went. Numbers moved across screens. Contracts were reviewed, approved, signed. His voice stayed steady. His posture stayed controlled. Anyone looking at him would have seen the same man they always saw. But his attention wasn't there. It kept drifting. Back to the hallway. Back to the phone call. Back to that one moment when Marisol had pressed her bag shut too quickly. By the time late afternoon came, Victor had already rearranged his schedule without saying it directly. A meeting pushed, another delegated. A dinner quietly cancelled. At 5:58, he was standing near the side entrance. He told himself it was coincidence. At 6, Marisol stepped out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a folded cloth. Same routine. Same quiet efficiency. She hung her apron neatly, adjusted her bag over her shoulder. Then she turned. Good evening, sir. Victor gave a short nod. Nothing unusual, nothing that would draw attention. She walked past him, and for a brief second he caught it again. That urgency, it wasn't visible in her face, not in her voice. But in the way her steps picked up once she crossed the threshold. In the way her hand tightened around the strap of her bag. The door closed. Victor waited 10 seconds. Then 20. Then he moved. He didn't call for his driver. That would have made it official, noticeable. Instead he walked out to the garage himself. He hadn't driven alone in the city in years. Not through the streets. Not through traffic. Not without tinted windows separating him from everything outside. But today, he chose a different car. One of the older ones. Less recognizable, less visible. He started the engine, waited, watched the long driveway. And then he saw her. Marisol walked quickly down the road, heading toward the bus stop at the end of the block. Same path, same pace. Victor kept his distance. He pulled out slowly, staying far enough behind that it wouldn't feel like following. But close enough not to lose her. She didn't look back. Not once. That told him something. Either she had nothing to hide, or she had learned how to move like someone who couldn't afford to look suspicious. The bus arrived. She stepped on. Victor drove past. Then circled back, parked half a block away, waited. 10 minutes later, the bus moved again. He followed. The city began to change as they drove. First the wide roads. Clean sidewalks. Glass buildings catching the last light of the day. The part of the city Victor knew well. The part he had shaped. Then slowly it shifted. The streets narrowed. The buildings aged. The polished edges gave way to cracks, to faded paint, to signs that hadn't been updated in years. Victor slowed down. He hadn't been here in a long time. Not because he couldn't, because there had never been a reason to. His company didn't build here, didn't invest here, didn't look here. The bus stopped. Marisol got off. Victor stayed back, letting a few cars pass before moving again. She walked down a smaller street now, quieter, less traffic. The kind of street where people actually noticed who passed through. Victor felt it immediately. He didn't belong here, not in the way he was used to belonging everywhere else. Marisol turned a corner. Victor parked, sat still for a moment, then got out. He didn't follow right away. He gave her space, let her walk ahead, let the distance grow just enough to feel safe. Then he turned the corner too. And that's when he saw it. She wasn't alone. A man stood near the sidewalk waiting, mid-40s maybe, worn jacket, tired posture. The kind of man who looked like life had asked too much for too long. Marisol stopped in front of him. They spoke, quietly. Victor couldn't hear the words, but he could read the body language. Tension. The man gestured with his hands, not aggressive, but firm. Marisol shook her head, said something. The man stepped closer. Victor's jaw tightened slightly. He took a step forward without thinking, then stopped. Marisol reached into her bag, pulled something out. Cash, folded bills. She handed it to him. The man took it, counted quickly, nodded once, said something else, then turned and walked away just like that. Marisol stood there for a moment, still, then she exhaled, a long breath. The kind you hold when you've been carrying something heavy. Victor felt something shift again. This time, it wasn't curiosity. It was confirmation. He had seen enough situations like this to recognize the pattern. Money, quiet exchange, no receipts, no explanation, debt, or something worse. Marisol adjusted her bag, looked around briefly, then kept walking. Victor didn't move right away. He stayed where he was, watching the empty space the man had left behind. His mind worked fast, automatically. Possibilities lined up. Debts, illegal payments, family trouble, something hidden, something risky, something that could reach back into his house, into his life. That thought bothered him more than anything else. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about what he didn't know, and what he couldn't control. Victor followed again, closer this time, more deliberate. Marisol walked down another narrow street, then another, until she reached a small row of houses at the end of a quiet block. She stopped in front of one. A simple place, one story, faded paint, a small yard that had been swept clean. Nothing about it stood out. Nothing about it matched the life Victor had imagined for her. She unlocked the door, stepped inside and disappeared. Victor stood across the street, hands in his coat pockets, looking at the house, at the door that had just closed. This was it. This was where she went every day with that urgency. This was what she had been hiding. A small house, in a neighborhood his company had never touched. He expected something else. Something that justified the secrecy. Something bigger, messier, more dangerous. But all he saw was quiet, and somehow that made it worse. Because quiet things were harder to read, harder to control, harder to predict. Victor took a slow breath. He could leave right now. Get back in the car, drive away. Return to the version of the world that made sense. But he didn't. Because the image of that cash exchange was still there. Because the phone call was still there. Because the way she had pressed that bag shut was still there. Too many pieces, not enough answers. He stepped forward, crossed the street, walked up to the door. Up close it looked even smaller, the paint chipped along the edges, the frame slightly uneven. A crack running near the corner that had been patched more than once. He stood there for a moment, listening. Nothing. Just the faint sound of something inside. Movement maybe. Or a voice too low to make out. Victor raised his hand. Paused. This was the moment. Once he knocked, there was no stepping back into ignorance. No pretending he didn't know. He knocked once, firm, clear, footsteps inside, quick, then slower. The door opened, and Marisol stood there, her eyes widened. For the first time since he had known her, truly widened. Not polite surprise, not controlled composure, real shock. Sir, her voice was steady, but only just. Behind her Victor heard something. A faint sound, a voice, small. Mom? Victor didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't look away. Because in that 1 second, something inside that house didn't match anything he had expected. And he knew, whatever was behind that door, was about to change everything. Marisol didn't step back right away. For a brief second, she just stood there, holding the door, her eyes searching his face like she was trying to understand how he had crossed a line that had never existed before. Victor didn't speak either. He wasn't used to moments like this. Moments where the next move wasn't already decided, where the script wasn't written. Inside the house, the small voice came again. Mom, who is it? Marisol's gaze flickered behind her just for a moment. Something softened there, then tightened again. "It's someone from work," she said quietly, not taking her eyes off Victor. There was a pause, a strange one, not long, but heavy. "Would you like to come in, sir?" she asked. The words were polite, careful, but beneath them, there was something else. Uncertainty. Victor nodded once. Yes. She stepped aside and he walked in. The first thing he noticed was how clean it was. Not polished, not styled, not designed to impress, but clean in a way that felt personal. Intentional. Every surface wiped, every object placed with purpose. Nothing wasted, nothing excessive. It wasn't his world, but it wasn't careless either. It was deliberate. The space was small, a narrow living room, a worn couch, a low table with a stack of school books, a kitchen just a few steps away, barely separated from the rest of the house. Victor stood still for a second longer than necessary. This was where she went every night. This was the place she rushed back to. It didn't match the image in his head, not at all. Then he heard footsteps. Light, quick. A boy appeared first, around 10 years old. Slim. Sharp eyes, the kind that observed everything before speaking. He stopped when he saw Victor, looked him up and down without hesitation. Then a girl followed, younger, maybe 7. Holding a notebook close to her chest like it mattered. She stayed a step behind the boy, watching. Not afraid, just careful. Marisol moved slightly forward. "This is Raphael," she said, nodding toward the boy, "and this is Sophia." Her voice had changed. Victor noticed it immediately. Softer, warmer, different from the quiet professionalism he knew. "This is Mr. Hale," she added. The boy straightened slightly. "Good evening, sir," he said. The tone was serious, practiced, not forced but learned. Victor nodded. "Good evening." Sophia didn't speak right away. She studied him. Her eyes moved slowly, taking in his suit, his shoes, the way he stood, the way he looked at the room. Then she stepped forward just a little. "Are you my mom's boss?" she asked. Marisol's hand shifted slightly, almost like she was about to stop her. Victor answered before she. "Yes." Sophia tilted her head. "You live in a big house, right?" Victor glanced around the room for a moment, then back at her. "Yes, bigger than this?" she asked. There was no challenge in her voice, just curiosity. Then said quietly, "Yes." Sophia nodded slowly like she had confirmed something. Then she lifted the notebook in her hands. "I draw houses," she said. "Do you want to see?" Victor didn't expect that. Not here. Not now. But he nodded. She handed it to him. He opened it. The pages were filled. Not random sketches, not careless drawings, structured, thoughtful, detailed in a way that didn't belong to a child her age. Buildings, small homes, clinics, schools. Some had labels, wide doors, more windows, garden here. Victor turned another page. And another. Something shifted in his chest. But it was there. "These are very good," he said. Sophia's face lit up. Not dramatically, not loudly, but fully. Like she believed him, like his words mattered. Behind him Marisol watched quietly. Not proud in a loud way, not expectant, present. Victor closed the notebook carefully and handed it back. "Thank you for showing me," he said. Sophia nodded and stepped back. Raphael had been watching the whole time, still, silent. Victor noticed the way the boy's eyes kept moving. Between him, between his mother, between the door. Like he was always tracking something. Always ready. That kind of awareness didn't come from nowhere. Victor turned slightly, and that's when he saw it. A door, half open, at the end of a short hallway, inside a bed. And someone lying on it, very still. Victor's gaze stayed there a moment too long. "My mother," she said quietly. Victor looked back at her. "She's resting." He nodded once. "Is she?" Marisol hesitated. Not long, but enough to show she was choosing her words. "Yes," she said. There was no explanation after that, no guilty, just a simple answer. But Victor didn't need more. Not yet. The room felt different now, quieter. He became aware of sounds he hadn't noticed before. A faint ticking clock. The soft shuffle of paper as Sophia flipped through her notebook again. The distant sound of breathing from behind that half-open door. Victor looked back toward it. Something about that stillness didn't feel temporary. Didn't feel like rest. It felt like something else. Something heavier. He turned back to Marisol, he said. Her expression changed, only slightly. But it changed. "What about him?" she asked. Victor held her gaze. "You gave him money." There it was, the reason he had come, the suspicion that had brought him here. For a moment Marisol didn't answer. Raphael looked up. Sophia stopped moving. The air shifted. Then Marisol exhaled slowly. "No excuse, just the truth. Just the truth." "Why?" His tone wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't soft either. It was the tone of a man used to answers, used to clarity. Marisol's hand tightened slightly at her side. "He's from the pharmacy," she said. "They've been waiting." "For what?" "For payment." The words landed quietly, but they carried weight. Victor frowned slightly. For medication? She nodded. For my mother. The room went still. Victor looked toward the hallway again. Toward the half-open door. Then back at Marisol. You're behind on payments? He asked. She met his eyes. Yes, no shame, no apology, just fact. I'm catching up, she added, as much as I can. Victor said nothing. The pieces started rearranging in his mind. The phone call, the urgency, the cash. Not hidden money. Not something illegal. Something else, something harder. Behind him, Sophia spoke again. Grandma forgets things, she said softly, like she was explaining something important. Some days she knows me. Some days she doesn't. Marisol closed her eyes for a brief second. Then opened them. Victor didn't move, didn't interrupt. Because suddenly everything he thought he knew about this situation felt incomplete. And maybe completely wrong. He looked at Marisol again. Really looked this time. Not as an employee. Not as part of the background. But as someone standing in front of him, holding more than he had ever bothered to see. And for the first time since he stepped into that house, Victor Hale wasn't thinking about control. He was thinking about something else. Something unfamiliar. Something uncomfortable. What else don't I know? The question settled in, and this time he didn't push it away. Victor didn't leave. He could have. The answers he came for were already there, clear, simple, not what he expected, but enough to explain everything he had seen. But something kept him in that small living room. Maybe it was the way Marisol had answered him. No excuses. No defensiveness. Just truth. Or maybe it was the quiet behind that half-open door. May I? He started, then paused. It wasn't a question he was used to asking. May I see her? Marisol looked at him carefully. Not surprised, not offended, just measuring. She may not recognize you, she said softly. Some days are better than others, that's all right. Another pause. Then she nodded. She walked toward the hallway. Slow, gentle. The kind of movement that didn't disturb anything around it. Victor followed a step behind, suddenly aware of how loud his shoes sounded on the floor. The room was small. Smaller than he expected. A single bed near the window, light coming in through thin curtains. A small table beside it with a glass of water and a folded cloth. On the bed lay an elderly woman, thin still, her white hair spread softly across the pillow. Her face was lined, deeply, but there was something peaceful about it. Not empty, not harsh, just worn. Marisol stepped closer. She picked up the cloth, dipped it into the water, pressed it gently against her mother's forehead. Mama, she said, her voice almost a whisper. You have a visitor. The woman stirred slowly, her eyes opened. They moved around the room first, unfocused, searching. Then they settled on Marisol. A small smile appeared. There you are, she said, her voice faint but warm. I thought you left me again. Marisol's hand stayed on hers. I'm here, she said. I didn't go far. The woman relaxed slightly. Then her eyes shifted, toward Victor. She studied him. Longer than Victor expected. There was something different in her gaze, not confusion, not fear. Curiosity. Who is this? She asked. Marisol hesitated. This is Mr. Hale. He's a friend? Victor almost reacted to that. Friend. The word didn't fit, not yet. But he said nothing. The woman kept looking at him. You have a serious face, she said. Victor blinked. He hadn't expected that. Behind him, he heard a faint sound. Sophia, trying not to laugh. I've been told that before, he said quietly. The woman nodded slowly, like she understood something deeper than the words. Serious faces carry heavy things, she murmured. You should sit. Victor glanced at Marisol. She gave a small nod. He sat. The wooden chair creaked slightly under his weight. For a few minutes no one rushed anything. The room settled. And then the woman began to talk. Not in a straight line. Not in full thoughts, but in pieces, memories. A garden, tomatoes, a lemon tree that refused to grow at first then suddenly did. A dress she wore when she was young. A song her mother used to hum. Victor listened, at first politely. The way he listened to things that didn't require action. But slowly something changed. He couldn't say exactly when. Maybe it was the way her voice softened when she spoke about the past. Or the way Marisol stayed beside her. Always present. Always attentive. Even when the words didn't make complete sense. Or maybe it was the stillness of the room. The kind of stillness that didn't feel empty. It felt full. Victor leaned back slightly in the chair. And for the first time in a long time, he stopped thinking about what came next. He just listened. The woman's voice slowed. Her words drifted, then stopped. She had fallen asleep mid-sentence. Just like that, peacefully. Still holding a faint smile. Marisol adjusted the blanket, gently, smoothed it across her chest. The way someone does without thinking, without effort. Because they've done it 1,000 times before. Victor stood slowly. He didn't speak. He stepped out of the room first, back into the small living area. Sophia was sitting at the table again, drawing quietly. Raphael had moved closer to the door, like he had been waiting for something. Marisol came out a moment later. She closed the door halfway. Not fully, just enough. They sat again. This time the silence was different. Victor looked down at his hands, then at the room, then back at Marisol. "How long?" he asked. She didn't need him to explain. 3 years since the diagnosis, she said. "Longer if you count the signs before that." Victor nodded slowly. "And you've been handling it alone?" "I have help during the day sometimes," she said. "A neighbor checks in. But nights, mornings, everything in between, that's mine." She said it calmly, not like a complaint, just truth. Victor looked toward the hallway again, then back at her. "And the children? They understand more than they should," she said. "But they're strong." There was a pause. Then she added quietly, "They don't have a choice." That landed. Victor felt it, the weight behind those words. Choice, something he had always had. Something he had built his life around. And here it wasn't even part of the equation. Slightly. The room felt smaller now. Not physically. Emotion. Everything inside it had weight. Meaning nothing was just there. He thought about his house. The long dining table that seated 14. The rooms no one used. The silence that stretched across entire floors. And then he thought about this place. The worn furniture, the narrow space. The constant presence of something real. Responsibility, care, time. Victor exhaled slowly. There was something else in his chest now. Not suspicion. Not curiosity. Something heavier. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. Regret. "I had a mother," he said suddenly. The words came out quieter than he expected. Marisol didn't interrupt. "She died 11 years ago," he continued. "I made sure she had everything. A nurse, medication, a house, all of it." He paused, looked down, "But I wasn't there." The room stayed still. Sophia's pencil stopped moving for just a second. Then continued. "I told myself it was enough," Victor said. "That providing was the same as showing up." He shook his head slightly. "It wasn't." Marisol watched him, not with sympathy, not with judgment. "Just understanding." "That's a hard lesson," she said quietly. Victor nodded once. "It is." He looked up, met her eyes. "And you're living it every day." She didn't respond to that, not directly, because there was nothing to say. It was already visible, in every detail of that house, in every movement, in every choice. Victor stood up. He didn't know why. Maybe because sitting there any longer felt like staying inside something he wasn't ready to fully face yet. Marisol stood too. "I should go," he said. She nodded. Walked him to the door. They didn't shake hands, didn't formalize the moment, it didn't need it. As he stepped outside, the air felt different. Cooler, quieter, but not empty. Victor walked down the small path toward the street. He reached his car, opened the door, then paused. Something pulled at him. He turned back. Looked at the house again. The faded paint. The small window, the light still on inside. And for the first time, Victor Hale didn't see a place beneath him. He saw something he had been missing. Something he didn't know how to name yet. But he knew this. He couldn't go back to his life, the same way he had left it. He got into the car, started the engine. But he didn't drive right away. He just sat there, hands on the wheel, staring ahead. Because a single thought had settled in his mind. Clear, unavoidable, and heavier than anything he had carried in years. If everything I believed about people was wrong, then what else have I built my life on? And for the first time, Victor didn't have an answer. Victor didn't sleep that night. He tried. He lay in his bed, in a room designed for comfort, silence, control. The temperature was perfect. The sheets were soft. The city stretched below him in quiet lines of light, but none of it worked. Every time he closed his eyes, the same images returned. The small room, the half-open door, Marisol's hand resting on her mother's, and the voice. "You have a serious face." He turned onto his side, then onto his back again. There was something about that moment that didn't let go. Not the words themselves, but what came with them. A feeling. Like someone had looked at him and seen more than he intended to show. At 2 a.m, Victor gave up trying to sleep. He got up, walked through the house without turning on the lights. The mansion was quiet. Too quiet. It had always been like that. He just hadn't noticed. He sat in the living room on a sofa that no one ever used. Looked out through the glass wall at the city below. And for the first time in years, he let his mind go somewhere he usually avoided. His mother. The memory didn't come all at once. It came in pieces. A kitchen. Smaller than Marisol's, a table with 2 chairs, a cup of tea that was always too hot at first, and her voice. Soft, patient, always asking instead of telling. He hadn't thought about that voice in a long time. Not clearly, not like this. Victor leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. He remembered the last year of her life. He had been busy. That was how he always explains it. Projects, meetings, expansion, growth. He had built everything during that time. Everything that now defined him. He had also visited her 4 times. 4 times in 12 months. Each visit short, each visit interrupted. Each visit ending with the same sentence. I'll come back soon. He never did. The memory sharpened. One visit stood out more than the others. She had shown him a small garden behind her house. Tomatoes. A few herbs. A lemon tree that barely reached his shoulder. She had been proud of that tree. She talked about it for 10 minutes. How long it took to grow. How it almost died one winter. How she kept watering it anyway. Victor remembered checking his watch. Twice. Then his phone had rung. He had stepped away, taken the call. Stayed on it longer than he should have. When he came back, she was still there. Waiting, smiling, like it didn't matter. Victor closed his eyes. That part stayed. Not what he said. Not what he did. But what he didn't do. He didn't stay. He didn't sit with her long enough to hear the rest of the story about that lemon tree. He didn't ask how she was feeling. He didn't notice how tired she looked. He just left. Because there was always something more important waiting. At least, that's what he told himself. Until the phone call came. A Thursday evening, he had been at dinner. A business dinner, important. He stepped outside to take it. The hospital, a calm voice, careful words. Victor remembered standing on the sidewalk after the call ended. The city moving around him. People passing by, cars driving, everything normal. And then he went back inside, sat down, finished dinner. Because there was nothing else to do. That's what he told himself. He sat in the dark living room now. 11 years later, and for the first time, he didn't believe that version of the story anymore. He stayed there until morning. When the light came in, it felt different. Not better, but clearer. Like something inside him had shifted slightly out of place, and wasn't going back. At 8, he was already sitting at the dining table. His coffee in front of him, untouched. When Marisol walked in, she paused. She wasn't used to seeing him there at that time. "Good morning, sir," she said carefully. Victor looked up. "Good morning." She moved toward the kitchen, started her routine. But something between them had changed. Not in a visible way. Not something anyone else would notice. But it was there. Victor watched her for a moment, then spoke. Marisol. She turned. He hesitated. Not because he didn't know what to say. Because he wasn't used to saying it. "I owe you an apology," he said. She didn't react right away. He continued. "I came to your home without asking. I followed you. That was not appropriate." The words felt unfamiliar, but they were clear. "I should have spoken to you directly." The room stayed quiet. Marisol held his gaze, then nodded once. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. That was it. No anger, no accusation, just acknowledgement, and somehow, that made it heavier. Victor nodded back. Then she returned to her work. But the silence now was different. It wasn't distance, it was space. The kind of space where something new could exist. Over the next few days, Victor started noticing things. Not big things, small ones. The way Marisol checked her phone more often around noon. The way she sometimes paused, just for a second, like she was calculating time in her head. The way she left at exactly the same minute every day. And the way he had never asked why. He also noticed something else, himself. The way he had moved through his own house for years without seeing the people in it. The way he had treated presence as function. Service, not human. That realization didn't come all at once. It came slowly, in moments. Like when he passed the gardener and realized he didn't know his name. Or when his assistant mentioned his mother again, and Victor remembered he had never followed up. Late one afternoon, Victor stopped his assistant in the hallway. "How is your mother?" he asked. The young man blinked. "Sir?" "Your mother," Victor repeated. "You mentioned she had surgery." The assistant stared for a second. Then nodded slowly. "She's better, sir. Recovering well." Victor nodded. "I'm glad." He walked away. Behind him the assistant stood still. Trying to process what had just happened. Victor didn't look back, but he felt it. Something was changing. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way that made sense yet, but in a quiet, steady way. Like a door opening slowly. That same evening Victor picked up his phone. He stared at it for a long moment, then dialed. His doctor, not for himself, for someone else. "I need a recommendation," he said when the call connected. "A specialist. Someone experienced with memory conditions, Alzheimer's." There was a pause on the other end. Then the doctor responded. Victor listened carefully, took down the name, the clinic, the waiting time. 4 months. Sat still, then picked up the phone again. Called the clinic directly. The receptionist was polite. Firm, no earlier appointments available. Victor listened. Then said calmly, "Please let the doctor know Victor Hale is asking." Another pause, longer this time. I'll see what I can do, she said. Victor ended the call, set the phone down. He didn't feel satisfied. Didn't feel like he had solved anything. Because this wasn't something that could be solved quickly. But it was something. A step. The next evening, he waited. Not in the hallway, not watching, just present. When Marisol prepared to leave, he spoke. Can you stay for a moment? She hesitated, then nodded. Sat across from him at the small kitchen table. Victor didn't waste time. I arranged an appointment, he said, for your mother, a specialist. Marisol didn't move, he continued. It's next Thursday, transportation will be handled. There's no cost to you. Silence filled the room. She looked down at her hands, then back at him. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. I know, Victor replied. Another pause. We've been managing, she added. I've seen how, he said. That stopped her. Not the words, the way he said them. He leaned forward slightly. You shouldn't have to carry all of it alone. Her fingers tightened slightly. Not in refusal, in hesitation. Because extra help wasn't simple. Not for someone who had built their life around managing without it. I don't know what to say, she admitted. You don't have to say anything, Victor said. Just tell me if you'll go. A long silence. Then finally yes. Her voice was soft, but certain. Victor nodded once. Thursday then. She stood, picked up her bag, paused at the door, then looked back at him. Thank you, she said. This time it wasn't just polite, it meant something. Victor didn't respond right away. He just watched her leave. The door closed. The house went quiet again. But it didn't feel distant. Just waiting. Victor stood there for a moment longer, then turned, walked slowly back into the living room, and for the first time, he wasn't thinking about what he had done. He was thinking about what came next, because something inside him had changed, and he knew, this wasn't the end of it. It was the beginning. Thursday came slower than Victor expected. Not because he had nothing to do, his schedule was full. Meetings, contracts, negotiations that normally demanded all of his attention. But this time, something kept pulling him away from it. He found himself checking the time more often, looking at his phone, waiting. He didn't go with them. He had thought about it, briefly. But it didn't feel right. That appointment, that moment belonged to Marisol and her mother, not to him. Still, the waiting was unfamiliar. He wasn't used to not being in control of outcomes. At 11:30 he was in the middle of a meeting when his phone buzzed. He ignored it. Then it buzzed again. Something in him shifted. He excused himself, stepped out into the hallway, looked at the screen, an unknown number. He knew immediately. He answered, hello? There was a small pause. Then her voice, it's Marisol. Victor didn't realize how much he had been holding until that moment. Yes, the doctor was very thorough, she said. She reviewed everything. Changed some medications. She said, with proper care, my mother can have more good days. Victor leaned slightly against the wall. Good, he said quietly, that's good. Another pause. She laughed today, Marisol added. Twice. Something about that detail stayed. Not the diagnosis, not the medical plan. That. She hasn't laughed like that in a while. Victor closed his eyes for a second. I'm glad, he said. And he meant it. They ended the call simply. No long conversation, no unnecessary words. But after he hung up, Victor stayed in the hallway longer than he needed to. Because that moment felt different. Not like closing a deal. Not like solving a problem. Something quieter. Something that didn't come with numbers or results. Just impact. That evening he didn't go home right away. Instead he drove. Not toward the mansion, toward her neighborhood. He didn't tell her he was coming. Didn't plan anything, he just went. The streets looked different in the late afternoon light. Still worn, still narrow. But alive in a way his part of the city wasn't. People outside, kids playing. Conversations happening in open doorways. Victor parked a little further away this time. Walked the rest. When he reached the house the door was open. He knocked lightly anyway. Raphael appeared first. Recognized him immediately. Mom, he called. Not Mr. Hale, not sir, just he. Like Victor had already become something expected. Marisol stepped out from the kitchen. Surprise crossed her face again. But this time it didn't stay as long. I didn't know you were coming, she said. I didn't either, Victor replied. That made her pause. Then she stepped aside. Come in. The house felt familiar now, not comfortable, but known. Victor noticed things he hadn't before. A stack of bills near the table. Carefully arranged, a list on the wall, medications. Times. Notes written in quick, neat handwriting. Structure control, her version of it. Sophia was sitting on the floor this time. Her notebook open again. She looked up. You came back, she said. Victor nodded. Yes, she considered that, then went back to drawing. Like it made sense, like it needed explanation. Victor sat down. Raphael stayed nearby, watching. Not suspicious, just aware. That awareness was still there. Victor recognized it now. It came from responsibility. From growing up faster than you should. How was she? Victor asked. Marisol leaned against the counter. Tired, she said, but better. She paused. The doctor explained a lot, things I didn't fully understand before. Victor nodded, and Marisol looked down at the table, then back at him. And I realized I've been doing everything by instinct. By routine, not always the right way. There was no shame in her voice, just honesty. I thought keeping things stable was enough, she continued. But she needs more than that, structure, adjustments, patience I didn't even know I was missing. Victor listened carefully, because that sounded familiar. Not the situation, but the idea. Thinking you're doing enough until you realize you're not. Sophia spoke again. I told the doctor I want to be one too, she said without looking up. Victor turned slightly. A doctor? She nodded. To help people like Grandma. There was a quiet certainty in her voice. Not childish, not imaginary. Real. Victor glanced at Marisol. She didn't interrupt, didn't soften it. She let it stand. School is hard, Sophia added. But I can do it. Victor noticed the way she said that, not asking, stating. Then Raphael spoke. She studies at night, he said. After everything. Sophia didn't look up. Because I have to, she replied. Victor felt something tighten in his chest again. Not discomfort, something deeper, recognition. This was what ambition looked like, without safety, without backup. He just necessity. And you, he asked Raphael. The boy shrugged. I fix things. He held up a small object, a broken remote, taken apart. Half repaired. Victor almost smiled. Important skill. Raphael nodded seriously. It saves money. Air stayed simple. Practical final. Marisol moved toward the table, started making tea. The same quiet rhythm Victor had seen before. Water, cups. Nothing wasted, nothing rushed. You don't have to keep coming, she said after a moment. Victor looked up. I know. She turned slightly. People do things like this sometimes, once. Maybe twice. Then they stop. She didn't say it with bitterness, just experience. Victor nodded slowly. I understand. Silence settled again. Then he said, I'm not sure yet what this is. She waited. But I know it's not finished. That was as honest as he could be. Marisol studied him for a second. Then gave a small nod, not acceptance, just acknowledgement. The tea was ready. They sat, simple cups, no ceremony. Victor took a sip. It was warm, plain. And for some reason it felt right. Time passed quietly. Conversation came in small pieces. Nothing forced, nothing heavy, just presence, and that was new for him, for all of them. When Victor stood to leave, it didn't feel like the first time anymore. Not like crossing into something unknown. Just stepping away from something real. At the door, Sophia spoke again. Next time, she said, I'll show you a better design. Victor paused. A better one? She nodded. For houses that don't feel small. He looked at her, then at the room, then back at her. I'd like that. He stepped outside. The air was cooler now, evening settling in. Victor walked back to his car, slower this time. Because something inside him was still shifting. Still adjusting, still learning. He got in. Closed the door, sat there for a moment. Then looked back at the house one more time. Lights still on, voices incessant, life happening. And then the thought came, clear, unavoidable. Not about her, not about the children, not even about the past, about him, about everything he had built. He looked out at the street, at the houses, at the neighborhood his company had never touched, never invested in, never cared about. And for the first time he didn't see it as separate. He saw it as part of the same city, the same system, the same responsibility. Victor started the engine, but this time he wasn't thinking about going home. He was thinking about something else. Something bigger. Something that would be harder than writing a check. Harder than fixing one life. He tightened his grip on the wheel, because the question forming in his mind wasn't small anymore. If I can change one life, why haven't I changed any of this? And he knew that question was going to change everything next. Victor didn't act on that thought right away. For most of his life, decisions came fast, clean, measured. If something made sense, he moved. If it didn't, he cut it off. This time, it wasn't that simple, because the question sitting in his mind wasn't about profit, or risk, or timing. It was about purpose. And Victor Hale had never built anything around that. The next morning he sat in his office, looking at a map of the city projected across the wall. It showed developments, investment zones, expansion plans, future projects already approved. Everything was color-coded, structured, predictable, except for one part, the neighborhood where Marisol lived. It sat there blank, no proposals, no planned expansion, ignored. Not by accident, by decision. Years ago his team had labeled it low return, limited infrastructure, High cost, low immediate profit. Victor had agreed without question. At the time it made sense. Now it didn't sit right. He stood up slowly, walked closer to the screen, zoomed in. The streets became clearer, the blocks, the empty spaces, the lack of everything his company specialized in: housing, access, stability. Victor stared at it longer than he expected, because now it wasn't just data. He had walked those streets, seen those houses, sat in one of them. He turned away from the screen, picked up his phone. "Get me the full file on that district," he told his assistant. "Everything. Zoning, ownership, past proposals." There was a pause on the other end. "That area isn't part of our current strategy, sir." "I'm aware." Another pause. "I'll have it ready within the hour." Victor ended the call, sat back down. And for the first time in years, he was questioning one of his own decisions. Not because it failed, because it never tried. That afternoon, the file was on his desk. Thick. Full of reasons not to invest. Infrastructure cost too high. Land ownership, fragmented. Minimal return projections. Victor flipped through it slowly. Page after page explaining why nothing should be done. He stopped halfway through, closed the file. Because he already knew all of this. He had approved it. But something was missing. People. There were no names, no faces, no lives behind those numbers. Just risk, just loss, just calculation. Victor leaned back in his chair and thought about Sophia. Her drawings. Her quiet certainty. "I can do it." He thought about Raphael, fixing broken things instead of replacing them, because it saved money. He thought about Marisol, holding everything together with routine and patience, without asking for anything. And then he thought about himself, a billionaire, a CEO, a man who had built towers across the city, and somehow none of it had touched that street. That realization didn't feel like failure. It felt like absence. That evening, Victor didn't go straight to Marisol's house. Instead he walked through the neighborhood. Alone, no driver, no assistant, just him. The streets were busier than before. People coming home from work, children playing, conversations happening on sidewalks. He noticed things he hadn't noticed the first time. The broken pavement, the dim streetlights, the lack of clinics. No nearby pharmacy except the one he had seen earlier. No signs of investment, just survival. Victor walked slower, not observing anymore, absorbing. He stopped near a small corner store, looked at it. Old, functional, barely maintained. A man stood outside leaning against the wall. Watching the street, Victor recognized him. The one Marisol had spoken to. The one who had taken the money. The man looked at him too. Recognition flickered. Not of who Victor was, but of where he had been. "You're not from around here," the man said. Victor didn't deny it. No. The man nodded. Didn't ask more, didn't care. "Everything costs more here," he added after a moment. "Time, money, patience." Victor looked at him. "What do you mean?" The man shrugged. "Getting help takes longer. Fixing things costs more. You wait more, you lose more." He pushed off the wall slightly. "People like you don't come here." Victor held his gaze. "Maybe that's the problem." The man smiled faintly. Not impressed, just aware. Maybe Victor walked away. But those words stayed. Everything costs more here. He understood that now. Not just financially, emotionally, physically, in time, in effort, in life. When he reached Marisol's house he didn't knock immediately. He stood outside, looked at the small space again. The door, the window, the light inside. Then he knocked. This time Raphael opened the door without hesitation. "You're back," he said. Victor nodded. "Yes." Marisol appeared behind him. She didn't look surprised anymore. Just thoughtful. "Come in," she said. Victor stepped inside. The same room, the same structure, but it felt different. Not because it changed, because they sat again. Simple. Quiet, no formal conversation. Just presence. After a few minutes, Victor spoke. "I walked around your neighborhood today." Marisol looked up. Why he didn't answer right away? Because the truth wasn't simple. "I wanted to understand it," he said finally. She held his gaze. And Victor exhaled slowly. "It's been ignored." She didn't react, because that wasn't new information. "It's not just this area," he added. "There are others like it." "Yes," she said. Quiet, steady. Victor leaned forward slightly. "My company, we've avoided places like this." Marisol didn't interrupt. "We called it strategy," he continued. "Low return, high risk." He paused, then added, "But now I'm not sure that was the right measure." That caught her attention. Because this wasn't about her anymore. This was bigger. She studied him. "What are you saying?" she asked. Victor looked around the room, at the walls, at the space. At everything that represented effort without support. "I'm saying I built a lot of things," he said, "but I left out entire parts of the city." The words settled. Heavy, real, and I don't think I can ignore that anymore. Silence followed, not uncomfortable. Just full. Sophia looked up from her notebook. Raphael stopped moving. Marisol stayed still, processing, because what he was saying wasn't small. And it wasn't easy. Changing something like that isn't simple, she said carefully. I know, it takes time, resources. People who actually understand this place. I know. Another pause. Then she asked the question. The one that mattered. Why now? Victor didn't answer immediately. Because he had asked himself the same thing, many times. But now, he had to say it out loud. Because I saw what it looks like when someone shows up, he said. He met her eyes, and I realized I haven't been doing that. The room went quiet again. This time deeper. Because that answer wasn't about business. It was about him. Marisol looked at him for a long moment. Then nodded slowly. Not agreement, not approval, just acknowledgement. Because she understood something important. This wasn't a decision yet. It was the beginning of one. Victor leaned back slightly. The weight of it settled. Because for the first time, he wasn't planning something for profit. He was considering something for impact. And that came with a different kind of risk. A different kind of responsibility. As he sat there, in that small room, surrounded by a life that had forced meaning into every choice, Victor understood one thing clearly. If he moved forward with this, it would change everything. Not just for them, for him, for his company, for the way he had lived his entire life. And as that realization settled in, another thought followed, quieter, but sharper. What if I don't know how to do this the right way? And for the first time in years, Victor Hale was about to build something. Without knowing if he would succeed. Victor didn't sleep much that night either. Not because of regret this time, because of direction. The question from the evening stayed with him. Why now? It echoed in different ways. In different tones. Sometimes like doubt, sometimes like accusation, and sometimes like a challenge. By morning he was already at his office before anyone else arrived. The city outside his window was still waking up. Light moving slowly across the buildings he had helped create. Glass catching the sun. Steel lines stretching upward. For years this view had meant one thing. Control, achievement, proof. Now it felt incomplete. Victor stood there longer than usual, then turned, picked up his phone. Call a strategy meeting, he said when his assistant answered. Senior team only, today. There was a brief pause. What's the topic, sir? Victor looked back at the city. Expansion, he said. A different kind. The meeting room was full within the hour. Executives, analysts, people who had built their careers by understanding Victor Hale's decisions before he even spoke them out loud. They were ready. Prepared. Expecting something predictable. Victor sat at the head of the table, looked at them. Then said, I want to revisit the districts we've previously labeled low return. The room went still. Not silent, but alert. One of the senior analysts spoke first. Those areas were evaluated thoroughly. The cost-to-return ratio doesn't justify. I've read the reports, Victor interrupted calmly. Another executive leaned forward. Are we talking about selective reinvestment? Limited scope? Victor shook his head. No. That caught them, he continued. I'm talking about full development potential: housing, infrastructure, access to services. The analyst frowned slightly. That would require a complete shift in allocation strategy. Those areas don't generate immediate returns. Victor nodded. I'm aware. Another voice joined in. There's also risk, ownership fragmentation, community resistance, regulatory delays. Victor didn't argue, didn't dismiss it, he just listened. Because they were right. Every point made sense, every objection was logical. That was the problem. Because logic had built everything he had. And somehow it had left entire communities behind. Victor leaned forward slightly. For years, we've asked one question before investing, he said. What's the return? He paused. Then added, I want to ask a different question now. The room stayed quiet. What's the impact? No one spoke immediately. Because that wasn't a metric they were used to measuring. One of the executives shifted in his seat. That's difficult to quantify. Victor nodded. Yes, another added, and it doesn't align with shareholder expectations. Victor met his gaze. Then we adjust expectations. That landed harder. Because now this wasn't a suggestion, it was direction. A senior partner leaned back, studied Victor carefully. This isn't about one project, is it? Victor didn't answer directly. Because the answer was obvious. No, the man said quietly. It's not. Silence filled the room again. Not confused this time, measured. Because they were starting to understand. Victor wasn't reacting. He was shifting. And when he shifted, everything moved. The meeting ended without a final decision. But something had started. Something that couldn't be undone easily. That afternoon, Victor returned to Marisol's neighborhood again. Not to observe, not to understand, but to think. He walked the same streets. But now he wasn't just seeing what was missing. He was imagining what could exist. A clinic where there was none. Better housing where decay had settled. Street lights that actually worked. Spaces where children didn't have to leave to find opportunity. It wasn't abstract anymore. It had faces now. Sophia. Marisol. He stopped near the small pharmacy. The same man stood outside again. This time he nodded when he saw Victor. "You came back," he said. "Yes." The man looked around the street, then back at him. "Not many do." Victor didn't respond because that was true. The man crossed his arms. "You thinking about something?" he asked. Victor considered that question, then said, "Yes." The man smiled slightly. "Careful with that," he said. "Thinking about this place, it pulls you in." Victor looked at him. "Is that a bad thing?" The man shrugged. "Depends what you're willing to do about it." That stayed. Victor nodded once, then walked on. When he reached the house, the door was closed this time. He knocked. Marisol opened. She looked tired, not unusually, but enough for him to notice. "Long day?" he asked. She nodded. "Every day is." He stepped inside. The room was quieter than before. Sophia wasn't there. Raphael sat at the table working on something small.
"Sophia?"
Victor asked. "School project," Marisol said. "She stayed late." Victor nodded, then looked toward the hallway. "Is she resting?" Marisol followed his gaze. Yes, there was something in her voice. Not fear. Not worry. Just awareness. Of time. Of limits. Victor understood that now. They sat. Not much conversation at first. Then Victor spoke. "I had a meeting today." Marisol looked up. "With my team." And Victor exhaled slowly. "I told them I want to invest here." She didn't react immediately. Because that wasn't a simple statement. "That's a big decision," she said carefully. "Yes. Why, tell me?" Victor looked at her. "Because I don't understand this place the way you do." That was honest, direct and unfamiliar for him. "I can read reports," he added. "Numbers. Projections. But that's not enough." Marisol stayed quiet. "So?" she asked. "So I need to know what matters here," he said. "From someone who actually lives it." She leaned back slightly, considering. Because this wasn't help anymore. This was involvement, responsibility. "You're asking me to guide you?" she said. "I'm asking you to tell me what I don't see." There was a long pause. Raphael looked up briefly, then went back to his work. Marisol looked around the room, at the walls, at the small space that held everything, then back at Victor. "You don't fix a place like this with one project," she said. "I know. You don't come in, build something, and leave. I know. You stay, you listen, you adjust." Victor nodded. "That's what I'm trying to do." She studied him. Not his words, his intent. Because she had seen people promise things before. Big things, fast things, then disappear. "You'll be questioned," she said. "I expect that. You'll be resisted, I understand." She held his gaze. "And if it gets difficult?" Victor didn't answer right away. Because that was the real question. Not planning, not strategy. Commitment. Finally, he said, "Then I stay." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Because for a man like Victor Hale, staying was not something he had practiced. Marisol looked at him for a long moment, then nodded, not fully convinced, but willing to see. Because something about it felt different, not certain but real. Outside the light began to fade. Evening settling in again. Victor sat there, in that same chair, in that same small room. And for the first time he wasn't thinking like a billionaire. Not calculating, not controlling. Just listening. And as that quiet settled around him, one realization became clear. If he wanted to build something that mattered here, he couldn't do it the way he had always done everything else. He would have to learn. From the ground up. And that meant he would have to trust people he had spent his whole life not trusting. Victor leaned back slightly. Because that thought felt more dangerous than any investment he had ever made. And this time, there was no guarantee it would pay off. Victor answered her question 3 days later. Not in a boardroom. Not in a polished speech. Not in one of those carefully arranged conversations rich men used when they wanted to sound sincere without actually giving anything away. He answered it in Marisol's kitchen, with a cup of tea going cold between his hands and the late afternoon light falling across the worn table. "Why now?" she asked again. This time she didn't soften it. She didn't lower her voice to protect him from the truth inside it. She asked the way people ask when they have earned the right to hear something real. Victor looked at the cup for a moment before he spoke. Because I ran out of excuses. The room stayed still. He lifted his eyes to hers. I told myself for years that being useful was the same as being present. That providing was enough. That if the bills were paid, if the house was standing, if the care was arranged, then I had done my part. He paused. It wasn't true then. It isn't true now. Marisol said nothing. Victor went on, quieter now. My mother died with everything she needed except me. I can dress that up however I want, but that's the truth. I was absent in all the ways that mattered. And after a while I built a whole life around not looking at that too closely. He exhaled slowly. Then I came here. I really saw you. I saw what it looked like when someone stayed. When someone kept showing up, even when it was hard. Even when no one praised them for it. Even when it cost them everything. His voice dropped. And I realized I was afraid of dying exactly the way I had been living. Surrounded by things, empty of people, that landed differently than any promise could have. Marisol looked at him for a long moment. He could see the caution still there. He respected it now. She wasn't ungrateful, she was careful. Life had made her careful. Finally she nodded once. If we do this, she said, it can't be about saving us. Victor's answer came without hesitation. It won't be. It can't be your name on a building and then everyone disappears. It won't be that either. She folded her hands on the table. Then it has to begin with listening. Not just to me. To this neighborhood. To the people who have been here while everyone else looked away. Victor nodded, agreed. That was how it started. Not with an announcement. Not with cameras. Not with a ribbon cutting. It started with meetings in church basements and folding chairs in school gyms. With local nurses, exhausted teachers, overworked mothers, shop owners, men who had patched broken sidewalks themselves because nobody else came, and teenagers who already knew too much about doing without. Victor sat through all of it. At first, people didn't trust him. Why would they? He was the billionaire whose world had always existed on the other side of the city. The kind of man who usually arrived with plans already drawn, and ears already closed. But he kept showing up. He listened when people were angry. He listened when they doubted him. He listened when they talked about medical deserts, unsafe housing, buses that ran late, children with talent and nowhere to put it. And slowly, very slowly, something changed. Not trust. Not all at once. But the beginning of it. The first project broke ground in early spring. It wasn't flashy. A modest community health center with space for memory care consultations, primary care visits, and after-school tutoring in the evenings. The kind of place his old business model would have dismissed in 5 minutes. Victor stood at the site in work boots he had barely learned how to wear without looking self-conscious. Dust lifted in the morning air. Sophia stood beside him holding a hard hat that kept slipping over one eye. They're really doing it, she said. Victor looked at the steel frame starting to rise. Yes, he said. They are. She glanced up at him. You too. He almost corrected her, then didn't. A week later, he met with a school counselor and a scholarship advisor. Not a charity director. Not a publicity team. Someone practical. Someone who understood that talent needed structure, not pity. Sophia was invited to a summer science program across the city. Transportation covered, tuition covered, supplies covered quietly, properly, in her own name. When Marisol found out, she cried in the laundry room, because it was the only place in the house where she could be alone for 60 seconds. When she came back out, her eyes were red, but her back was straight. We accept, she told Victor. But she works for it. She earns every piece of it. Victor nodded. That was always the plan. The deepest change came on a Thursday evening that looked ordinary from the outside. The house smelled faintly of soup and eucalyptus. Raphael was at the table repairing the hinge on a cabinet door. He had decided annoyed him. Sophia was reading aloud from a biology workbook, stumbling over one word, then correcting herself before anyone could help. In the bedroom, Marisol sat beside her mother and brushed her hair slowly. Her mother had been more confused that week, more distant. The good moments had been shorter, softer, slipping away. Marisol had learned not to ask too much from them. So when the old woman opened her eyes and looked straight at her, fully clearly, Marisol almost didn't breathe. Marisol, her mother said, just that, her name. No confusion, no searching, no stranger's face. Marisol's hand stopped in her mother's hair. Mama? The old woman smiled, small, tired, real. You stayed, she whispered. And that was enough to break something open. Marisol lowered her head and let herself cry without hiding it this time. Not the careful crying she did alone. Not the silent kind, real tears, grief and relief and love all tangled together. Her mother lifted a trembling hand. Marisol caught it with both of hers and pressed it to her cheek. I'm here, she said through tears. I'm here. At the doorway, Victor stood still and looked away after a second because some moments were too sacred to witness directly. But he heard it. The voice. The truth inside it. The kind of moment money could never buy and regret could never recreate. That night he didn't go back to the mansion right away. He stayed. Sophia fell asleep on the couch with her workbook open on her chest. Raphael refused to admit he was tired, then nodded off, sitting upright in a chair with a screwdriver still in his hand. Marisol covered them both with the same worn blanket and laughed softly at the sight. Victor sat in the kitchen, then in the living room, then finally nowhere in particular. Just there. Present. The house was small, the walls were thin. The furniture didn't match. Nothing in it would have impressed a single person in his old world. And yet, sitting there in that little home, listening to breathing from the bedroom, the creak of old pipes, the rustle of pages, the soft sounds of people who belonged to one another, Victor felt something he had not felt in his mansion in years. Not power. Not success. Peace. He looked around and understood, with a clarity that was almost painful, that the billionaire had not changed this family's life nearly as much as this family had changed his. Not by asking, not by admiring him, but by showing him, quietly and without performance, what a full life actually looked like. If there's someone in your life you've been meaning to visit, someone you keep telling yourself you'll make time for later, maybe don't wait. Sometimes the most important things we build aren't made of glass or steel. They're built by simply showing up. And if this story stayed with you, tell us what part touched you most. And stay close for the next one.